When we think about nepotism, our minds usually jump to fairness or maybe unfairness. But what if it's something much bigger? What if it's a kind of hidden tax on competence that, in the end, we all have to pay? To really get how deep this rabbit hole goes, we've got to start with a pretty recent scandal. Our story kicks off in 2013 with a massive settlement. JPMorgan shelled out over $250 million to settle allegations over this very specific, very quiet hiring pipeline they had. They actually called it the Sons and Daughters Program. And from 2006 to 2013, they hired about 100 people, not because of their resumes, but because their parents were powerful officials in China. But here's the wild part, the thing that shows you just how calculated this was. This wasn't some subtle wink and a nod deal. They literally built spreadsheets with titles like referral hires versus revenue. They were tracking it, connecting these politically connected hires directly to the money they brought in. And the payoff? Over $100 million in new business. It was a straight-up transactional exchange of jobs for deals. But that kind of blatant quid pro quo, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Nepotism winds its way into almost every part of our lives, creating these little dynasties and locking in wealth. So yeah, we know it exists. That's not the question. The real question is, what's the actual price tag? How much is it costing the entire economy to choose connections over competence? To get a handle on the problem today, we actually need to look back, way back. See, nepotism is nothing new. It's basically as old as power itself. You could almost call it a form of welfare for the rich that's just changed its clothes over the centuries. I mean, think about it. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs just treated the whole state like a family business. In Rome, emperors were handing out military commands based on who was loyal, not who was the best general. The word nepotism itself actually comes from the Latin for nephew, a direct nod to those Renaissance popes who were famous for putting their relatives in powerful church positions. It really wasn't until the Enlightenment that the idea of competence even started to challenge kinship for the top spot. But here's the catch. While the institutions changed, we went from monarchies to corporations, that basic human incentive to favor your own, that didn't go anywhere. Nepotism didn't disappear, it just adapted. So today, the Pope might be wearing a Patagonia vest and running a private equity firm, but the fundamental principle is exactly the same. Okay, so how does this modern version actually play out? Let's dig into the hard data. Because this is where you can see just how deeply the deck is stacked in favor of people who are well-connected. The scale of this is just staggering. And look, this isn't just about some trust fund kids. This is happening everywhere, on factory floors, in union halls, even at your local fire department. Nearly 1 out of every 3 workers ends up at the same company as their parents. Their odds of getting that job are 200 times better just because of their last name. And yep, that connection pays. It pays really well. These workers can earn up to 20% more than their peers for doing the exact same job. Not because they're more skilled, not because they're more passionate, but simply because, their dad knows a guy. And this whole game starts way before anyone even thinks about a job application. Take a look at elite universities like Harvard. Legacy students, kids with a family connection, are 5 times more likely to get in than other applicants who have similar qualifications. And this isn't just Harvard. It's a pretty common practice all across the Ivy League. And that early head start, it has consequences that last a lifetime. The average income for a Harvard grad right out of college is around $90,000. Now compare that to graduates from amazing public universities like Michigan or Berkeley, and the difference is nearly double. That initial leg up translates into a massive gap in earnings for years to come. So we've seen the perks for the individual. But what about the cost to everyone else? This is where we start to see the real price of incompetence, that hidden drag that bad nepotistic leadership puts on businesses and on entire economies. The studies on this are just night and day. When a family business gets passed on to a professional from outside the family, you see real growth. Sales, assets, headcount, they all go up significantly in just 4 years. But what happens when the business stays in the family? Stagnation, zero growth, right across the board. And this isn't just about a few family businesses. When you zoom out, this effect literally drags down entire countries. One cross-country analysis found that for every 3% rise in nepotism, you get a corresponding 1% drop in that nation's human capital. And what that means is a less skilled workforce, lower productivity, and slower growth for everybody. Now, all of these problems we've been talking about, They're about to get a massive shot of adrenaline from one of the biggest economic events in history. A coming tidal wave of wealth transfer that's going to act like a tsunami of unearned advantage. To wrap our heads around this, there's this wonky term economists use called intergenerational elasticity. But the idea is actually super simple. It just measures how much your parents' income determines your own. So a high number means low mobility. It means the economic ladder is really hard to climb. Okay, now hold on to this number. In the US alone, baby boomers are expected to pass down an estimated $100 trillion in assets over the next 2 decades. This is the crest of that wave, a massive transfer that's going to lock in economic status for a whole generation. And here's the real kicker. That wealth is not distributed evenly, not even close. More than half of all that inherited wealth is going to go to just the top 2% of the population. This is not a tide that lifts all boats. This is more like a flood that swamps a few valleys while leaving everyone else high and dry. But here is the most fascinating and honestly destructive paradox in all of this. That $100 trillion wave, it's incredibly fragile. The data is clear. 70% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation. And by the third, 90% of it is gone. And these aren't clean, quick failures. They are slow, value-draining collapses. If you want a perfect case study, look no further than the Vanderbilt family. Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt built one of the largest fortunes in American history. His son actually managed to double it. But then the decline began. The heirs started splurging on mansions and yachts, and within just a few decades, crushed by incompetence and mismanagement, that legendary fortune had completely vanished. So when you pull all these threads together, the history, the modern data, this coming wave of inheritance, a really clear picture starts to form. And it explains why the system can feel so stuck, why real change feels so hard to come by. Because the true cost of nepotism is invisible. It's the stuff you don't see. It's the brilliant person who was never hired. It's the game-changing innovation that was never funded because all the capital was locked up in some stagnant family business. It's the economic growth that simply never happened. That's the opportunity cost, and we all end up paying for it. So the hard conclusion you have to come to is this. We don't really live in the meritocracy we like to pretend we do. We live in a dynastic economy, a system where, more often than not, connections beat competence, and where you start the race is a much better predictor of where you'll finish than how talented or driven you are. There's an old proverb that just nails it. We're often just looking at the same donkey, new saddle. And maybe the most damaging part of all is that we collectively play along. We pretend it's a thoroughbred, celebrating inherited success as if it were earned, and ignoring the true cost of a system that picks its own over the best.